And then I'm going to share my screen, which is how we're going to do our presentation today. All right, welcome. Mary, take it away.
Hi, everyone. I'm so glad you're with us. My name is Mary MacGregor, and I retired recently as missioner for Congregational Vitality of the Diocese of Texas. It's a joy to be here. My stewardship journey began many years ago after a near fatal accident my husband had. And when he fully recovered, I was so overwhelmed with thankfulness to God that for the first time I really began to pay attention to God's abundance in my life. And that led to me really getting very serious about stewardship, seeking out resources. And then all of a sudden, I'm working for the Bishop of Texas for 20 years, and part of my responsibility is stewardship with congregations. And we were blessed to use the TENS resources and to send people to the TENS conferences at the time. And I learned so much. And so when the opportunity came for me to become a member of the TENS board, I was thrilled and very happy to do so. And I'd like to introduce you Davey Gerhard. Davey is our new executive director. He's been with TENS since January. And right now, he and his partner are amicably sharing bandwidth and air conditioning in their home in San Francisco. A little bit more about Davey. He has been involved with stewardship for a very long time, including being a member at Holy Innocents Church in San Francisco in the Noe Valley community neighborhood. And he has been chair of their stewardship committee for 22 years. Davey, you and I have to talk about that later, about sharing the wealth of leadership and stewardship in your own congregation. So Davey, it's all yours.
Thank you. I might need to form some other stewardship leaders, but you know, they just keep asking and I keep saying yes. It's the way of the church. Well, thank you. And thank you, Mary, for joining us on today's call. Thank you all. We have 128 of you, and I know there are others who have signed up as early as today. So we may be having other folks join on. I just want to remind you as we get started, today's session is being recorded. We're asking that you type your questions into the Q&A tab. That's where every few slides we will stop and read off and answer any questions that have been asked. And that's how we'll be reading your questions. Please don't use the chat tab to ask us questions. We're not monitoring that for questions. We are using that. If there's a resource that you'd like everyone to know about, maybe a website or a book or a process that you're using for stewardship, please put it in there and then everyone will be able to see that. So Q&A for questions, chat for resources. I'm going to go through a few slides here and then we will stop and answer questions. And I'll start by way of saying that it is my honor to be the executive director for TENS, the Episcopal Network for Stewardship. I joined, as Mary said, in January, right before the world changed, and we had no idea when we gathered in a room in Houston to plot out our year, what this year would look like. And we've been adapting and changing our resources to make it more possible for us to do our stewardship campaigns this year in a very changed landscape. So a lot of what we'll be covering today is to talk about the piece of how we build and form meaningful community around stewardship. And that's going to talk about some resources, some tips, and some opportunities for year-round stewardship. If you've participated in earlier sessions, we've had a couple of sessions before this one on virtual stewardship and TENS resources. There are a couple of pieces of this that will feel familiar to you. We're sharing some information a second time so that we can catch everybody up, but not too much of this is redundant from other experiences, so you'll be getting plenty of new stuff as well. So here are the goals that we've established for today's webinar. As I said, we want to give space and show you how to give space for meaningful formation and stewardship practices to shape your theology of abundance and generosity and money. We're going to talk about some common best practices and tools in storytelling around stewardship themes and generosity. We're going to talk a little bit about how TENS has been working all year to adapt resources that make sense in 2020, which is a year unlike others. So we have some special tools and ideas for you. And then we'll be talking about implementing some stewardship practices that you can use year-round to keep the conversation about generosity and abundance going. So let's talk a little bit about 2020 and some of the challenges that we are experiencing as we move into our pledge drive and pledge season. I just want to name these, and we're going to go through a couple of the challenges that 2020 brings to us, because I think by naming them, talking about them, and being ready to cast that vision and talk about it with folks in our congregations who are participating in stewardship, we can help everybody be prepared for what we're going into. So we're not all meeting in person. Some communities may be in person. Some communities may still be 100% virtually meeting. And many communities will be doing something in a hybrid way, where some communities are meeting virtually and also have some people back in the church. So we want to be able to acknowledge that and say, how do we make stewardship and pledge drive this year accessible to everyone, no matter how they're participating in our community this year? Let's just name the fact that there is economic fallout all around our country, and it differs greatly by region and household and neighborhood. It's keenly felt in many of our faith communities, but it's not felt equally everywhere. So we need to be adaptable and ready to move. You know your communities the best. And we're also uncertain. We're uncertain about what 2021 will bring. If 2020 has brought so much, who's to say what next year will be like? And that's not to make us feel scared, it's to prepare us for how we might talk about our stewardship pledge drives that are impacting the 2021 year. So how do we talk about money when there's economic fallout and pandemic-related unemployment? Let's remind, and I'll say this over and over today, there is no shame when we talk about our pledge drives and our pledging in churches. There's no shame, there's no guilt, there's no duty. This is about joy and opportunity and participation in Christian community. We need to remember that if people can't pledge what they did last year, or they need to make changes, that's fine. Every gift matters, and there's no shame in that. We're not here to judge folks about that. Remember that some families aren't struggling. We've talked about this before in previous sessions, so you'll remember this conversation maybe. But some families aren't struggling in the same way. So some members actually may be able to increase their giving. I know in my household, I'm spending a lot less than I normally do because my options are limited in some ways. So I may have more money to give to my stewardship drive this year than I have in years past. Not everyone is like that and that fortunate, but there are some households that are experiencing this moment differently. Let's be ready for that and not assume that everyone is in the same place. Remember that every conversation about pledging and pledges is a pastoral one. Every time we talk about money with our sisters and brothers in Christian community, we are not just talking about cash and finances. We're talking about all the things that our culture puts on money, like hopes and dreams and fears and retirement plans and college education and health concerns. So when we're talking about our gifts with each other, and we're especially later when we talk about how we might invite each other to participate in the pledge campaign this year, we're having pastoral conversations. Mm-hmm. How do we talk about stewardship when our congregation is facing cuts? So this is another thing that I want us to talk about. You're also going to get these slides, so you can go over this with your vestries and bishops committees and stewardship committees later. But I just want to present a couple of these ideas to you now. How do we focus on the mission when we may have some cuts in our congregations that we need to talk about? And I do that by reminding us that the work of the church continues. We say, and we have been saying for the past few months, that while the doors may be closed, the church is open. We are still serving people in our community and serving each other. The needs of the church don't change. So as we are discussing our pledge drive this year and our plans for 2021, remember, focus on the mission and keep focused on the mission. Did your congregation apply or receive the SBA PPP loan earlier this year? And I say that to say that it shows that there's been a goodwill effort on the part of our church leadership to steward our resources and take advantage of every opportunity that's been made available to keep things running in church. This helps us remember that we as church leaders have been working really hard since the beginning of the pandemic to keep things running in our congregations when there's been so much disruption. So reminding folks that your church has been faithfully stewarding your gifts and doing the best that it can with what it has, it shows that effort and that goodwill and that meaning as we talk about impact on the budget next year. Also remember that some folks may be able to make extraordinary gifts. They may be making gifts from required minimum distributions, from their IRAs or from other sources. They may have appreciated securities that they choose to give as a part of their pledge campaign. Remember that some folks can make extraordinary gifts. And if you've been holding off, maybe waiting for a capital campaign or a future project to ask people to make a big gift, maybe if you're having a budget shortfall, this is the year to ask them for their gift. Again, you know your congregation better than anyone. And then finally, how do we talk about stewardship and 2021 when there's so much uncertainty in the world? So let's remember that uncertainty is not a new story for Christians. From our very beginning, we've had uncertainty about how we will continue and where we will develop, and we've banked on the Christian hope. We have lived into the hope that everything is going to work itself out, that there is a plan for this, and that as there is uncertainty around us, the church has tools and experience and resources to help us get through uncertainty. Remember that pledges can be changed. I always say this when I'm asking people to participate in a pledge campaign. Remember to tell them and remind us all that if your situation changes throughout the year and you need to make a different kind of pledge or change to what you have committed, that's absolutely fine. This is a part of our responsibility and our transparency and our love for each other in Christian community. We don't want people to make difficult decisions. We do want them to make prayerful decisions. And so the way that they do that, if they need to make a change, there's no shame and there's no guilt. So maybe emphasize that this year as we go into our pledge campaigns. We know that we don't know what 2021 is going to be. It's going to be all right, and we'll be with you in that journey. The most important thing is that we remember that when people make a pledge, they've done it through prayer, through discernment, through deep reflection. And we should encourage them in that, and we should remember that their pledge is their best gift. We have to believe that as stewardship leaders, that when we make a gift, it's the best one we can make. So how do we create safe places to talk about difficult topics? We're going to go through a series of talking about some small groups. And one of the ways that we are imagining that your stewardship can run this year is by having some small group formation around the themes of stewardship, generosity, and abundance. So as we do those in small groups, they are places where we can create the space to have room for those difficult topics. So in creating safe space, we want to nurture all voices, but keep any one of them from dominating. Also allow silence or time for people to process. I am an introvert. It takes me a while to put my words into a place where I'm ready to share them with people. So give space for your introverts when you create a safe place in a small group. I know many of you have done small groups before. These are tips for folks who are thinking about it for a first time, or reminders for all of us who have done small group work. Keep things positive, which is to say that doesn't mean everything has to be just fine. It means let's talk about what's possible. Talk about the vision, cast things in the future term of our church. Train our facilitators on facilitation skills, how to keep a conversation moving, how to help guide a conversation that feels like it's getting stuck, how to work with all members so that they feel connected and participating.
Davey, can I jump in here with a comment about facilitators and leaders of small groups? You know, money can be a very emotional topic, and what we're trying to do is really develop opportunities where people can share their hearts, their thoughts, some of their fears about money, about stewardship, about their own theology of stewardship. And the one thing I would say is, as we consider forming small groups and choosing the facilitators, to choose people who might have already demonstrated the capacity to be good, not only good leaders, but good listeners. And also people who don't have personal agendas around this. They may feel very passionately about stewardship, and that's fine. But what we don't want to do is pick people who will try to dominate those small group conversations, because the participants will run away and not want to contribute or be a part of it again. So just be thoughtful. Some of these facilitators may not be your biggest givers. They may very well be people who are very skilled at listening and facilitating small groups. And for an example, there may be teachers in your congregation, or people who do social work, or people who deal with small groups all the time in different capacities. So that is a key to the success of your small group, is picking people who are really going to be good at that facilitation.
Thanks, Mary. And your wisdom and experience in small groups is vast. So I really appreciate that. We have leaders, and they may not, you know, we always think that our stewardship folks need to be our biggest givers or whatever. No, they just need to be really well formed in how to facilitate good conversation. And as we go through later today, we'll talk a little bit about strategies for inviting people to participate. Stewardship is an invitation. It's not a demand, it's not begging, it's not forcing the issue, it's asking people to participate in the community. I know some of you are wondering about these small groups that we're talking about, and we're going to go over them in more detail in a little bit. It's key to how we imagine forming community this year. So one more slide about small groups before we talk a little bit more about what these groups look like. These are common norms, and you've probably seen these before in small group work. I give you the slide so that you can take it and copy it and use it and add to it with the things that make sense in your own community. But this is a standard list, I think, of norms that we follow. We want to speak for ourselves. I can't be Mary and have her experience. So when I speak from my perspective. One of the things that I always put into norms is about not commenting on other people's responses unless that has explicitly been invited. And this is because we want to avoid, that's exactly how I feel, and this is how I'd solve your problem, sort of stuff with each other. We want the group to come up. This isn't a support group. It's a group that's there to do some formation and thinking. So really make sure that people are ready for that. As Mary said, make sure the folks who are leading the conversations don't have agendas of their own, because then they'll be great facilitators for everyone's stuff. There's often a question in a norm of small groups about confidentiality versus privacy, and I want to talk just a little bit about that. I've suggested here that we keep the conversations private, but share the lessons and the insights. That's to say, don't say, Davey said all these great things about his giving and how he's really gearing up this year, but do say, there are some people in our congregation that are really excited about stewardship, and they're going to do some good things this year. You know, so keep the names out of it or the personal stories, and do share the lessons, because that's the meat that we get in small group, and we do want to share that with our larger community.
Davey, we've got some really good questions. I'd like to address some of them, please.
Please.
Please advise from Dave, I think it's Divvy's 411. Please advise how to work with small groups online. Folks where I am are not ready to meet in person much. Some folks will not use Zoom, which makes it difficult. I may just have to figure it out in my own situation. So any thoughts about advising how to work with small groups online?
Well, so yes, if you have folks who are really resistant to technology, small groups online may be a hard sell. But one of the things I do like about Zoom is, I know you've just said that Zoom isn't a favorite tool, but one of the things I do like about it is that you don't have to be, you don't have to have a laptop or even an internet connection to use all of its functions. Yes, you do if you want to have your camera on and if you want to have your microphone on, but Zoom relies on the good old-fashioned telephone too. So you can have small groups that meet where they can't see and be seen, but they can hear and be heard. And that's a really, so you can have members that are comfortable with technology, and they can use Zoom, and the same platform can be used with someone who just wants to use a telephone, and that's technology that they trust. So that is a way to do it. I know that this year, many of the ways that we usually do small groups in stewardship, like dinners and small group meetings and Bible studies, things like that that we normally do in person, or we meet for breakfast, or however we like to do our small groups, it's going to have to be different when people aren't able or willing to meet in community. We're going to talk a little bit more about how to form groups online and how to enroll people, but I do like Zoom for the fact that phones can be used as well.
We have a couple other really good questions. I'm going to combine two of them. One from Kathy, and both from Kathy. Can anyone suggest a book that would be good for adult ed in terms of talking about money in this time of uncertainty, and also just books in general about abundance and generosity?
I love that. Mary and I were talking just before we came online about developing a book list on stewardship, and between us and with other folks, I'm sure we could develop a great one. I really like, I always default to Henry Nouwen's book, The Spirituality of Fundraising. It is one of my favorite books because you can read it in about 23 minutes. It's a good thing in a book, but because it is full of wisdom, and it's really easy to digest it. There are other practical books that walk through step by step. This is how you run a campaign or form a campaign, and we can put together a list and get that out to you. I also really like Growing Generous Hearts and Growing Givers. Those are great books that talk about the theology of abundance. Mary, do you have a quick?
I love Christine Miller and Scott McKenzie of Horizon Stewardship. They put out some incredible books. One is out of print, but you can probably buy it used on Amazon. It's called Climb Higher. It's just stunningly good and helpful in terms of being very positive in your approach, and the things you need to remember. And then they had a follow-on book called Bounty,
Mhm.
which was 10 ways to increase giving in your church. That really was a follow-on to Climbing Higher. That's Christine Miller and Scott McKenzie. So just do a little search and you can find them. And again, I think Bounty is still in print. Excellent books.
Right.
One addresses vision of a congregation and how that impacts stewardship. And, I think we are in a particular time of uncertainty, but stewardship is always about faith and generosity.
Mhm.
And it ties so closely back to our relationship with God that no matter what you read about stewardship and giving in the church, you're going to find very common messages, whether the time is uncertain, like we are going through now, or in a time of great expansion and abundance. The message really applies across the board. So anyway, I agree with Henry Nouwen's book. Hugely important for everyone to read. And then again, Christine Miller and Scott McKenzie. Those are my recommendations. I've got one more question, and I think,
Okay.
David, you may want to address it, or maybe it's going to be addressed later, is how do you get people to join small groups?
Aha, yes, we will talk about that a little later. So hold on to that question. We're going to talk about some strategies to enroll people. I also had one more book. I'm sorry to go back to that because it's such a great question. One of our ardent 10 supporters, Charles Cluin out of Maryland, has written a book called 1 Minute Stewardship that is full of really great tips and tricks and ideas, not just on the pledge campaign, but year-round stewardship and ideas. So that's another book that you can get pretty easily out there.
And what is his name again, the author?
Charles Cluin, Cloughen.
Okay.
He's wonderful.
Great.
His book. Do we have other questions that have come up?
No, that's it for now.
Okay. Thanks, friends. We're going to move on and talk a little bit more about these small groups that we keep talking about. So what is TENS providing this year to help you with your stewardship campaigns? So if you've used TENS in the past, you'll find some of this stuff very familiar. You always get a theological statement about our theme this year, faith-filled generosity, as you see on the screen there. We give you logos to put into your materials that you can use in web and print. We give it to you in all the kinds of ways, in Illustrator files and picture files and all of it. We give you some sample letters and customizable pledge cards. Those are things that you can use in your congregation to talk about and communicate the idea. You can adapt them. We give them to you in Microsoft Word so you can change things around and make them ready for you to use. We give you seasonal reflections, and we're going to talk about these at the end of the session as well. The seasonal reflections kind of summarize the whole season and put the season of the church year and put a theological way to approach stewardship, generosity, and abundance together. Of course, during the pledge season, from October and November Sundays, you'll get weekly reflections that do that same thing about creating a stewardship theme from our readings each week. And as we're doing here with this webinar, we give you ongoing training, teaching, and coaching. We've created some ways to make all of this adaptable for your online use this year. So these small groups that we're talking about, why are we insisting on them? I think it's because we're missing some of the pieces that we normally have when we are gathered in community in person. We're missing that in-person connection, the drama of the offertory, when we can talk about our gifts and our giving, when we can make those personalized announcements, maybe at the end of the piece or at the announcement time, however that works in your liturgy. We're missing some of those testimonials that people often give during their stewardship, during pledge drive. And so we're hoping that you can develop some small groups and get us through our pledge campaigns this year. We have some strategies for that. So we're recommending at least 3 small group meetings throughout your pledge campaign. We're assuming a pledge campaign goes for about 6 to 8 weeks. So 3 meetings over the course of that time. So one is your kickoff. We want you to make a really big deal about your kickoff this year and have fun with it, but also to make sure that that is where you give everybody their materials. If you've developed a narrative budget, if you've put together a color brochure that talks about what your money goes for and how you raise it and what you spend it on, this is the time to make sure that everybody has that information. Also to make sure that they have the letters and the pledge cards and all of that that go into your stewardship packet. This year, we're not able to rely on people picking it up at the back of the church on their way out. So we're going to have to spend the postage, and we're going to have to use email to make sure that that gets out to everyone. Some folks are doing their kickoff meeting in a large group, and then they'll use small groups in Zoom to do that. And we'll talk a little bit more about how that works later. We recommend that you have a Bible study, a scripture study on generosity and abundance. Ask people to pray about their pledge and learn what the church teaches and what the apostles talk about when they talk about money, possessions, and generosity. And then finally, a third meeting that really goes into our missioning and visioning ideas of the church. Who are we, and what do we want, and what do we dream about? This is a time to engage people's spirit and excitement about why they are members and what the future holds. And this is where we'll talk about inviting people to pledge. And I'm going to go into those 3 in more detail right now. So who is a small group leader? Mary talked about this earlier. So when you go to convene folks, you might pick folks who are committed to stewardship, so they've already made their own pledge. That's key. I find that when I'm making an ask of someone, it is so much more authentic if I have already made my gift. That is how we invite people into a process. We need to know and believe in why our church is raising the money that it is. So really understand what your mission and your ministry in the community is. You should know your budget and be able to speak to it as a small group leader, but you don't have to have all the questions answered, right? So there are some things that you may not understand or things that you may not know. It is perfectly acceptable to say, I don't know that. Here's how you get in touch with the treasurer or someone else to get that information. You should be a good listener. Small groups, as Mary said earlier, are about intimacy and mutual support. So your social workers, your teachers, your therapists, they make really good small group leaders, not because we want them to be support groups, but because people who are good listeners and can facilitate other people. How many small groups do you need? And now this starts to talk about those questions. How do we form these groups? So I think that a small group should emphasize the word small. Small is relative to your congregation, of course.
Yes.
What could be small in one place is big in another. But I think that 12 people is a really good size for a small group. Yeah, they can get a little bigger, but too big, and within an hour, you don't give everybody a chance to speak. So I really think that 12 is probably a maximum number for most places. I would say 6 is a minimum number, because when you have fewer than that, if one person is missing that week, or if it's a quiet week, then you're trying to pull content from the group. You don't want that. So 6 to 12 is a great number for small groups. Obviously, if you have a huge number of people who want to participate in small groups and you have a finite number of conveners, then the math will work out differently, and you'll just have to use your facilitation skills really well to make sure that everybody is enrolled.
Davey, can I also
Yeah, please.
say that with the question, how do you get people to join small groups? There will be people who will not join,
Yep.
and that's okay. And, you know, God bless them, and that's fine. For whatever reason, we don't need to probe, but they just don't want to. The other side of that is the respected leadership of your church must say, I really want you to join a small group.
Right.
You know, any reluctance on the part of our clergy, especially, is going to trickle down with no enthusiasm and reluctance with the individual. So your vestry, your respected leaders who may not even have a ministry, but they have influence, your clergy, your staff, they all should say, this is an exciting opportunity for us, especially during this time of COVID, when we can regather and really focus on this. And I'm just asking you to do it 3 times in 6 weeks. And we're going to have fun doing this. We're going to learn a lot about each other. So when we have that kind of enthusiasm from the leadership, that will trickle down, that will encourage people to join.
Yeah, thanks, Mary. I mean, that's really good to point out. Not everybody is ready for a small group. There are some people who hate the idea of getting together in small group, and there are many people that may just be too busy. I also understand that it's a big ask. It's a big ask from the facilitator, and it's a big ask from our congregations to say we want you to do 3 small groups when you're already on Zoom every day for work and for school and for parenting and for your social life. All those things that we are using the technology for, asking for more is a big ask. And our stewardship is really important, and our pledge drive is really important. So it's a limited time ask. You're not asking people to do this forever. Do make a big deal about this, I think.
And do keep those meetings to an hour.
We'll keep those meetings short, right? Yeah. An hour, I find, 60 to 90 minutes is about the extreme edge of my time span online. After that, I just it's diminishing returns. Some folks are wondering perhaps if you can use existing small groups. So if you have a men's group that already meets, or a parents group, or a gardening club, or your knitters and quilters, ask them if they may be willing to adopt a stewardship theme for some of their October, November, or pledge drive meetings. So that's already an existing small group. They already have comfort with each other. You can ask them if they might be willing to shake up their content a little and do some other kinds of work for the mission of the church. You can randomly assign people to these groups. So, you know, take up the directory and divide it out. Davey takes A through E, and that's how it goes, and sends out an email and invites people into it, or whatever. There are online tools, forms, and even something as simple as a Google Sheet that you can put into a shared space so that people can sign themselves up. I want to be a part of Mary's group, and she meets on Thursdays at 4 p.m. and that works for me. So that's a great way to do it as well. There are lots of ways that you can form these small groups. It's just really important that you try them out. How do we do that first meeting, the kickoff? So many congregations are going to hold a virtual coffee hour following their Sunday service in which they kick off their pledge campaign. If you're already planning on doing it, it is the great time to start off your small group process. I would recommend by doing it where you have the big moment where the clergy and maybe the treasurer and maybe your senior or junior warden, your stewardship chair, they're there either as co-hosts of your Zoom coffee hour or sharing pre-recorded messages if they can't be there in person, and they talk about why we're doing this and answer questions about the budget and talk about what we're doing this year. Walk through the materials and the case for giving. Why are we raising this money? Make sure that everybody feels good about that. And then within the context of your Zoom coffee hour, you can create Zoom breakout rooms. And those breakout rooms could be the first meeting of your small groups.
Mm-hmm.
So they allow you from a big meeting to have small meetings within them that have a time limit, maybe meet for 20 minutes. And then at 20 minutes, all those meetings close and they come back into the large group and you can say goodbye to everyone. It's a tool that Zoom offers. It's pretty easy to use. Many of you are probably already using it, and it's a great way to do this first small group meeting. This is about getting to know each other. So some really simple questions like, how long have you been a member? When you first came, what made this place feel like you wanted to come back to it? That's a question I love to ask and hear. I love the answers that people give about what made their church make them feel special. And what's your favorite thing about this church? I love that too. You'll get all kinds of answers from people and ministries and events to items and the way the light comes through the stained glass. Who knows what people are attracted to? But when they give their own answer, it shows who they are and how they're tied to our communities. So the convener, they should use this time to introduce what you're doing, go over any norms that you have. You can share those norms or create them over and over again. Make sure everyone has access to all the information and answer and ask any questions. So that's the first group. We're going to go through the second and third, and then I'm going to stop and we're going to talk a little bit about your questions and some other processes. What's the second small group? So we recommend a Bible study, a study from Scripture that helps us work through some of the teaching that the church has to offer on generosity and abundance. Many of you probably use a Lectio Divina or a modified Lectio Bible study, sort of use this process that we're talking about, where you read a passage 3 times and you answer different questions each time. We've given you one way to do it. You can Google, Bible study on a topic and come up with a bazillion different ways that may work in your community. This is one way that I've seen work really well, and it's really easy. You'll get this slide so you don't have to furiously take down notes. These are several scriptures from the Hebrew and New Testament traditions that help us understand some of the best scriptures on generosity and abundance. You may have others that you want to put into this list. Please do.
And I would say, really make sure to get a copy of that slide, because that's a gold mine of references in scripture around stewardship. And each and every one of them can be an independent small group discussion.
Oh,
so that's a great slide, Davey. Glad you added it.
No, it's pretty great. The Bible says a lot. That final small group is about visioning and ministry and mission. So appreciative inquiry is a model of meeting and solving issues that you may already be familiar with. It doesn't focus on the negative or the problems, but it focuses on the positive, what's possible, what's good, what's exciting. In that, it casts people in a great way to begin asking and answering questions for each other. So I've put some questions that I use when I run appreciative inquiry conversations with vestries or stewardship committees about why we do what we do in church, who else in our neighborhood is doing the work that we're doing. This helps us talk about the vision of the church. So I'll give you this slide as well. You can adapt it and use these questions as you like. So the big thing in that third small group, or if you're only running one small group, this is the slide to pay attention to, because I am recommending that since we can't do every member canvases this year as we normally might, and stewardship is going to take a little bit more of a virtual appeal and a way to go. So I'm asking us to do some asks, invitations within the small group process or at the conclusion of your pledge drive. So that's to say, the folks who have convened or the people who are on your stewardship committee are going to invite their sisters and brothers to make their gift within the context of a conversation, not just a letter or an email. Although if that's all you got, that's all you've got. But if you can do it within a small group, if you can do it within a conversation, it is so much more beautiful and authentic if you can invite people into the process. So we're going to walk through a few slides on how that looks and give you some fundraisers tips on how to ask for money and how to talk about that invitation. The first is to develop a script. Know what you're going to say, and it's okay to have a script and to practice it. I've been raising money in churches for a couple of decades now, and I will tell you that I still get sweaty palms every time I ask someone for money. That never goes away, no matter how many times I've done it, and whether I'm asking for $5 or $5 million, and I've done both, I get nervous. It's a big deal. You're asking people to buy into our community and make a really important gift. So develop a script and be all right with that. And then finally, it's an invitation. The small group member, the small group leader, and the people in the room, they don't need to know what somebody has pledged in the past, how much they're pledging now. This isn't about dollar amount. This is about, will you join me? Will you join me in making a gift this year? Whatever that gift is, and then show them either online how to submit their pledge form or where to mail it or how to get it to the church so that it can be counted. When you ask for a gift, be clear about why. Be focused on the mission and be emboldened by the fact that you are doing good. There is good work to be done in the world. You are spirit-filled. This is prayer supported. There's no shame in asking people inviting people to make their pledge this year. You know your congregation and your peers, so rely on your relationship, their body language, listen more than you speak. You'll learn so much. I learned so much when I ask people to participate in giving, and I listen for what they're saying. I love that. And also be clear. Know what your case is. I say this over and over again. Believe in your case for giving, the reasons that you're raising money in your congregation, know them and believe in them. I've given you 4 scenarios here on how you can make the ask or extend the invitation. The first is for someone who makes a gift every year. And so you may be in a conversation or in the small group process, you may say something like this, you know, we made our gift, our whole household has made its gift this year, will you join us? It's a simple ask. Another scenario for if you're asking people to increase their giving, and we often do this in our stewardship campaigns, we say, if you can pledge more than you did last year, or if everybody could raise their pledge by 10% or 7%, this is what we could do. So in those years or in those conversations in which you're asking people to make an increase, I say, well, we increased our giving. My household increased its giving this year. Can you make a stretch gift? And the answer could be no, I'm going to give what I gave last year, or I'll think about it. All of those things are just fine. But making the ask is really important. One of the things that we know comes up often is that things change from year to year. And so when you know that it's been a tough year for someone in your congregation, that doesn't mean don't ask them to participate. It means respect what they can do and ask them still to participate. Our stewardship campaigns, our stewardship in general, is about full participation from the community. No matter what they can give, that's what matters. So invite them into that. And finally, when you are dealing with someone who's never made a pledge before, perhaps who is new to the community, you may have to do some extra education about why this church pledges, how we raise our budget, and how we set next year's goals, why we do it differently than some other traditions where they rely on the plate or on the faith giving that happens on Sunday mornings. So if your community is one that relies on pledges, you may have to talk about why and what that is and invite them to join you. One more slide before we gather up your questions, and I see plenty are coming in. This is just a say this, don't say this, an easy way to think about framing the ask or the invitation to join stewardship. I often get questions, can I make a special gift? I love the choir, that's what I'd like my money to go to. And again, I always say, we fund our whole mission. We fund the mission of the church, which includes the things that you love, but I'm asking you to make your gift to the whole budget. We really don't encourage designated gifts. Remind people that their gift has impact, that you're doing real things in the community with the money that you raise. It's changing lives. It's changing your members' lives and your neighbors' lives. Don't say we're giving gifts to keep the light on, keep the lights on, or those office supplies bought, or all those other things that we sometimes talk about in our pledge campaigns. Remind people that money translates to meaning and impact. When people say, what does our priest do and why do they get paid so much? Remind people that our staff is receiving a living wage so that they can raise their families with dignity, retire with dignity, live good lives in the community. Don't focus on how little priests get paid comparatively to their other friends who have professional degrees. Remind them that you're doing the best that you can and their clergy is doing really hard work. Every gift matters. So I love this, and I've also seen stewardship campaigns where they kind of ramp up the give till it hurts, sacrifice. I'd say back off from that this year. Every gift matters, and be sympathetic and open. So these are a few options for you, and you can take these, you can add to this list, and maybe some of your questions are about this.
We've got a bunch of questions here.
Love it.
So let me just jump in. From Marcia, can you ask the speaker for permission to comment on their response? I'm not exactly sure if they mean right now or post this webinar.
Or maybe you're talking about in the small groups where we encourage people to not crosstalk. Is that what you're talking about, Marcia?
That's possibly. Marcia, if you want to write a new question to be a little bit more, explore a little bit more your question with us, we will explain it. We'll try to answer it for you. Could you elaborate about how to make a Zoom meeting feel more like a safe place?
Yeah.
You know, I would say establishing those norms and really stating this is how we're going to do this. And then also say, if you do not feel led to say anything, it's just fine. Just listen, you know. And so not having people absolutely be forced to talk, but when you tell them in advance how it's going to proceed, that creates more safety in the meeting. So really, really want to encourage you to lay out those norms. Don't force people to talk. Create that silent space for people who may be thinking about what they want to say, but really someone else jumps in front of them. So just saying in advance, what are the norms here and what we can expect from this? And you're certainly welcome just to sit back and listen. It helps really create that safety. David, do you have anything to add to that?
No,
about safety in Zoom?
That's exactly right, Mary. Setting those expectations. And I'll also, in case the question was about Zoom safety features, I'll remind you that Zoom does have a lot of ways that you can set up meetings with passwords. You can set up waiting rooms in Zoom so that You admit people whose names you recognize. You can ask them to register for their Zoom before they join. And then you have a little safeguard that you know all these people are meant to be there. We have had not tens, but in the church at large, there have been times at which Zoom has been taken over by people who have their own agenda. You, as the owner of that Zoom meeting, have a lot of controls,
Hmm.
the ability to turn somebody's camera off or mute them, or even eject them from a meeting if they're really, if they just can't get things under control. So
Here's another interesting question. Is a drive-through Eucharist a good time and place to distribute pledge cards?
absolutely. So like if you have an option of actually seeing people and being able to hand them something, this would be a great way to hand out all your pledge materials. So your budget, your letter, your brochure if you're doing one, the pledge cards, absolutely. Just like you would in church, right? So we do that on a well, drive-through Eucharist is church, but just like we would when churches, the doors are open and we are there in person, you might say, pick up your pledge card, or we're going to pass them out now, fill them out at your leisure. Yeah, go for it.
Okay, and this is Marsha again. I think she explained it. In a small group, is it acceptable to ask the speaker for permission to respond? Absolutely.
Oh, totally. Yeah, yeah. If if that's set up, so there may be a part of the conversation where you're asking people to share their deep personal story. And then you might say, well, does anybody have a clarifying question, something I didn't understand? Um, but what you don't want to do is challenge the authenticity or the purpose of someone's story, right? So totally appropriate to say, you know, you know, can you say more about that? But maybe it's not the time to try to solve what they're talking about unless they've said, I need some help with this, right? But then again, it's up to the facilitator to say this is not a support group. If you need offline conversation, or maybe you can connect later. So keep the small group kind of protected in that way so that everybody can speak and say what they want to say.
Another question from Steve. What's the best way to access the documents TENS offers? And at this point, Davey, you might want to mention about membership.
Sure thing. So you're all likely TENS members because you've been hearing about this from our newsletter and from our website. That means you have access to all the documents that TENS provides, including these webinars, including the resources. If you go to tens.org and look at the member resources tab, there will be, and we will publish it at the end of this document. We will publish the password and the username so that you can have access to it. TENS members are from individuals. Sometimes it's a congregation that signs up to be a member, or very frequently it's an entire diocese that then gives the TENS resources to all of its congregations. They're free for you.
And don't fail to go on the website and look up our older resources that are out there that go significantly back. They may be helpful to you. And I think we've addressed this. It's a difficult challenge. What if most people in your congregation don't like small groups, let alone being online?
Yeah, obviously, if people don't like small groups, if they don't want to be online, this adaptation of the tool is probably not the best way. Finding ways to create the community and the formation are really important. And so as we go through perhaps the next slides, when we talk about year-round formation, there are ways to keep this conversation going that don't rely necessarily on small groups, but can rely on preaching and teaching and adult education and things like that. So we're always trying to form faithful and generous people. But for this year's Stewardship Pledge campaign, However you're planning on reaching folks, if that's by the phone, if that's just through email, if that's by letter, I would encourage you to try one of these models of getting people together, at least in a large group, to go through some of these things. And right now, online is the way we're doing large group stuff. So I do realize that technology means some people will never participate.
This is an important question. Some I will answer because they're really more specific, but um, hold on a minute, they're coming in pretty fast. Let me go back here a minute. I lost the current one. Does the Zoom breakout function allow you to assign people to breakout rooms?
Yes.
Assign facilitators, make sure they're not randomly assigned. I know you can move people once breakout rooms are created, but can you do that ahead of time?
You can't do it ahead of time. You've got to have someone who's quick with their finger and throws people into the right meeting and assigns them. So I've seen it done in groups as large as like 100 or more, where you just say, okay, we're taking the next 2 minutes to put everyone into small groups, and the co-hosts do that, and they do it through the mechanized system. Just ask people, remind them that it'll take a minute, and then their small group will come up.
All right, we have Mary Campbell really wants to work this weekend on these slides, with these slides as a resource. What's the possibility of being able to get them now from you, especially the one on biblical references? Maybe she should email you directly and you send it to her. What are your thoughts, Davey?
Yeah, well, Mary, I'm going to send them out this afternoon to everyone. If you need them even more quickly than this afternoon, as soon as this session ends, send me an email and I will send them to you and have them ready to go. I also want to say, while we're talking about the slides, they are currently being translated into Spanish as well. I'm sorry I didn't have them ready for you today in Spanish. So that'll be probably take another week. Our translator had a family emergency. So I want you to know that these are also coming in Spanish, as all our materials are in English and in Spanish.
Okay, a couple other questions. These questions that you have noted for us, people might be uncomfortable answering in a group, or are these dialogues for one-on-one conversation? You know, I would say right off the bat, they're a guide. And some of them you will just have to determine, and I would also recommend that not just one person make this decision, whether we use these questions or not. Working with your leadership of your church, having a small group to discern what might be the best questions. And you can use these as a guide, or you can write your own that you might feel are more appropriate to your group. So just, every place is different. Some people may be more accustomed to some conversation that goes deeper than others. So just be wise in looking at them, discerning as a leadership group, a stewardship committee, working with your clergy, whoever, to discern what questions might be used for your groups. That'd be my advice. What do you think, Davey?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely the case. I think that if we've done the small groups and we've created the safe place and we have used the tools, then some of the vulnerability embedded in these questions can be asked. These people are meeting kind of week after week. Maybe they already know each other. There's some big questions. And later when we talk about spiritual money autobiographies, the questions are real deep. So yeah, they can get pretty personal, but our money is personal, right? But so are our lives as people in church with each other. So, you know, you can tailor the questions if you feel like some of them are too invasive or too personal, but some people and some groups may be ready to go that deep. You know your folks.
This is a general question. I have a question to take advantage of people from so many different places. When is your usual commitment Sunday?
I love that. If you could put that into the chat, And make sure you select panelists and all attendees. You have two options when you type something into the chat. If you want to respond to that question and tell us when your commitment Sunday is, maybe how long your pledge drive, maybe say something like, we do a 6-week pledge drive and end on Christ the King or First Advent or whatever you like to say. I would love that. Yes, please take advantage. There are 131 of you on this call. I bet we'll have 131.
So Elizabeth, do that for us. We'd love to have that research. Now, this is a tax question, and Davey, you may know more about this than I do. I was recently informed, this is from St. Martin's in Aurora. I was recently informed that designated gifts are not tax deductible, that gifts are tax deductible only if the recipient has total freedom in how it's used. Is this indeed the case? I've never heard this before.
No.
Do you know anything about that?
I haven't heard that. That's interesting, and so I don't have that particular experience. I think as I understand the tax code, I am not a tax lawyer. I just want to be clear on that. As I understand it, a nonprofit's responsibility, and churches are nonprofits in this realm, our responsibility is to say that no good or service was received in exchange for this donation. If that language appears on a receipt, it's tax deductible. Designated gifts that are used for mission purposes are tax deductible. So I suppose if you said that there was some kind of designated gift that didn't go to the mission, although I would be hard pressed to find what that would be in a church, then perhaps there would be some tax question around it. But no, designated gifts, if people are giving, I hope that they don't, but if people say I'm only supporting purchasing new prayer books or only giving to the choir or only want to go to children, those are tax deductible as long as the donor hasn't received anything in exchange for it.
Okay, I know we have some more things we want to get into in terms of resources for year-round stewardship, Davey, but let me read one of these as a comment. I'll save some of these questions for the end. And this is a comment. For your information, we're using last year's foyer groups as a base for Zoom small groups. There's already a sense of comfort. Okay?
Oh, great, yeah. If you have existing groups or a structure for that, using them for formation of stewardship is really a good way to do it.
Okay, so Davey, I know we're limited in our time left, and I know you want to review resources, and that stewardship is a deeply spiritual issue, and the church is really called to help people with the development of their spiritual lives and spiritual disciplines. So does TENS have any resources to help us think about stewardship as a year-round education and formation?
Yeah, so I think this question about year-round stewardship is really important, but there's no reason why every year when Pledge Drive happens, we should be surprised by it, right? Stewardship is something we can talk about all the time. Let's remember that our friend and chief prophet, Jesus, spent 40% of his parables talking about money and possessions and generosity. That's 40%. So imagine if your preacher preached 40% of their sermons on stewardship, you might get a little tired of the topic. But that's to say that it is a really important topic year-round, and it's a big deal. And we're so bad in the church, I say myself too, so bad about talking about money because we put the worry, the anxiety about money on it. But really, when we're talking about it as abundance and generosity and participating together as community, then it doesn't seem so scary. So we have a few tools that we can help you use in these small groups or in large groups or in your adult ed going forward that we want to go over with you. Some tools on money autobiographies, storytelling, how to use one of our important documents, the Baptismal Covenant, as a reminder for fundraising values and stewardship values. We have themes throughout the church year that can be used. And the thing I want to highlight most is that if you only do one other meeting about stewardship all year round, so that's to say you do your pledge drive and then you only have one more conversation on it, I'm recommending that you do some kind of a mid-year pledge campaign review. This is often seen as, it comes usually like right after Easter or right before summer, and it's when we are maxed out, our clergy is exhausted from Easter. But having this opportunity to say, we're halfway through the year, what did we raise? What are we doing with your money? Here are how the ministries are going. Here's what we are excited about. Yes, it's about summer and the cash flow crunch is also here. So let's talk about this as an opportunity to keep paying paying on your pledge. A mid-year review is a great way to remind people that we're doing this work year round. So spiritual money autobiographies. I love this tool. And this is a deep tool. So for folks who are wondering about vulnerability in small groups, this is a big vulnerability because it's asking us really deep questions. You know, I remember the time, for example, when my father came home from work and he'd been laid off and what that dinner was like and the anxiety. That's one of the unhappy memories I have about money in my family and my childhood. When I share that story and talk about it in terms of my own generosity and opinions about money and value about money with Christians, it begins to be a really beautiful conversation about our own episodes and our own events in our lives that have led to our formation about money. So I ask these questions. How do you feel about your present financial status? How does that inform your giving? How do you feel about asking for help if you need it? How do you feel when other people ask for help if they need it? And that gets deep into our feeling about charity and generosity and how we share. How do we go to bed every night knowing that there are people who have gone to bed with no food and who don't have access to resources like we have? How does that shape our generosity and abundance in church? These aren't meant to make us feel terrible. They're there to make us feel that we are in relationship with our money and remind us that our values, our faith values, inform how we spend, save, and share our gifts. Storytelling. We're going to go through a couple of these slides and then we'll have time to answer all of your questions. Storytelling is beautiful in stewardship because it shows, it's one of those times where we can explain the impact that our gifts have on the community. So I love having somebody who benefits from one of your church's ministries talk and throughout the year, perhaps this year in a pre-recorded video or some other format that is safe. If you have folks who regularly get food from your food bank or who have benefited from your clothing drive or who have been tutored in an after-school program and they want to talk about that experience and they give permission to share that experience, it is wonderful to bring that back into the congregation and remind people what our gifts do for people that we don't always see on Sundays. That might not always be safe or appropriate, and so when that's the case, having somebody who volunteers or works in those programs come in and talk about the impact that they see on our neighbors is also a really good way. So a program staff or volunteer telling the story about why they're involved in this mission and how it has impact is a really beautiful gift. And then always tell stories from people who are current givers. Why are they giving? Why do they pledge? Their impact is most authentic because they're sharing their story with each other, with their brothers and sisters about why they are part of a community and why they give.
Davey, can I make a comment about that?
Yeah.
Some of the questions have really revealed a lot of the anxiety around talking about money and stewardship. And I would say people are getting much more comfortable in making videos, using their iPhones, their phones to make videos, sharing videos. Absolutely. If yours is a church where there has rarely been a testimony given about personal stewardship, or one that even is very comfortable with it, um, videoed little testimonies from people about why I give. It can be very simple. It can even be a montage of 10 different people saying why I give to this church, or it can be individual ones. Can help people get accustomed to hearing testimonies if they have not ever heard them before, and just build the almost a permission giving culture for talking about stewardship and talking about personal giving. So I just really want to encourage churches, especially those churches out there that you all represent, who have not done videoed short testimonials about giving during the annual pledge campaign. You often hear it in a capital campaign, but there are some churches that don't regularly do that for an annual campaign. I just want to encourage you to do it,
Yep.
and to find people who are comfortable talking about that, because indeed, when parishioners who are reluctant to give their own personal thoughts or talk about it hear their friends talk about why I give every year, it just opens the door, cracks the door open to those conversations. I just really, really want to encourage you to do that. It's almost becoming a basic piece of annual giving campaigns.
Truly. Thanks, Mary, for bringing that up. And it's so true. It's absolutely the case. We've got 10 minutes left in this. And so what I'm going to do is, since you're all going to get these slides, I'm just going to show them to you. And then I really want to focus the last 10 minutes on your questions. I think what you have to say is probably more interesting than what I have to say. So just let me show you these, and then we're going to ask for your questions. These are tools that you can use for ongoing conversations in small and large groups in your congregation about stewardship and generosity. So we all know the baptismal covenant. We say it often, we're familiar with it. I'm not suggesting that it is only a statement of fundraising values. It is in fact a core statement of our belief, but there are things that we can use in that common document to tease out some messages and use it as a framework for a conversation on stewardship. The same is true of the church year. So our liturgical calendar is in us as Episcopalians. We know the seasons and how they move through, and every one of them gives us a different lens through which to view our generosity and abundance. So as we think about moving through the church year, these are things that can be incorporated into adult formation, into sermons, into letters from the rector, things that help us talk and think about stewardship and formation year round. And it's not just the big seasons of the church, it's also the feasts and fasts that can be great opportunities to focus on different elements of stewardship. And stewardship, when I think about it, is about our generosity in general, our commitment and participation in pledge campaign, and it's also about planned giving and legacy societies. And we're going to have a whole nother series on that later in the year, which you'll be invited to through newsletters and other things, talking about planned giving. But I've inserted them at various moments in the year where we can talk about how people have made gifts in the past that impact the church and found it, and what we can do with those. So these are a few tools that you can have to use to bring this conversation into your small and large groups, into your sermons, and into your education year-round. There's, again, how you get access to the resources and the username and password. So please download this year's resources if you haven't already, and let us know how you're using them and how we can help you use them. We've got some time left for questions. And Mary, I hope we have some.
Right. There have been a couple people who said they did not get the previous ones that you sent out. So please note Davey's email, because he's going to be more than happy to send you this deck. If for some reason today you do not get the deck, and again, check your spam folders in case they went in there, but check his email. I'd be happy to send them to you. Okay, let me see here. Okay. Okay, there's a question around promoting, creating a desire for parishioners to join and participate in small group discussions at all. I would just say, if you're a congregation that is not accustomed to having small group discussions, it is really a great way to build community on all sorts of levels, on Christian formation and just all sorts of topics for small groups. But particularly around stewardship, I really think it has to be a vision of your leadership to want to create this opportunity for people. And then you need to realize that it may be a slow development. Yep. But if it is, every step in that direction is a good, informative one. So celebrate the fact that if you have an active congregation of usually 100 on Sunday, and you have 25 people who are willing to be in these small groups for the very first time to talk about stewardship, celebrate that. You know, a lot of it is in our expectations as leaders. And it may be a slow grow for your congregation, but it's headed in the right direction, because sharing our stewardship questions, our stories, helps us with our personal formation. Absolutely. So I just really want to encourage you to make those steps and celebrate the engagement that your congregation does do. And don't expect 100% participation, because it won't. It just simply won't be 100%, but celebrate that. All right, let me look at some of these other questions. Anything else you want to say about that, Davey?
Absolutely right. Celebrate every time somebody's willing to enter into a conversation about this, no matter how they do it.
Okay. So a lot of these are about when you're going to send out the deck.
It's coming.
Okay, and also was a question that I answered. It was, will Zoom automatically let you assign people and have breakout rooms? Yeah. Some of that is dependent on your subscription level of Zoom. So you need to go into Zoom, your leadership, see what is available through your church, and to understand that function of breakout rooms for Zoom. Someone is asking about, doesn't visioning happen prior to a budget development?
Wouldn't that be
nice? Yes, it does. And there have to be some corresponding plans along with that. But I would also say that if your congregation hasn't recently developed any like a short-term vision for the next 1 to 3 years of things that they want to achieve, that you can budget for that visioning to come in the next year. It anticipates that we will do it. There may be a cost in having someone come in and help you with that, even via Zoom, develop this vision, or how are we going to do that? It may be some extra meetings we're going to have. It may, who knows, there may be some cost involved. So just because your church does not have a vision doesn't mean you can't plan to create one in the coming year. Because out of that God-given vision will come action, will come plans that really will help us put legs and action to that vision and help us move forward.
That's the case. And when I think about visioning as a part of the sort of appreciative inquiry process, I'm not saying that that's budget impact visioning, like, you know, but it's more engaging people in what the future of the church looks like as a way to talk about where impact could be. So that's not a place where we say, I'm going to take down all of these vision notes and submit them into the budget next year. It's a place to begin that fruitful conversation about what is the vision of the church that you want? Where is this church going that you're excited about? When I think about the visioning of appreciative inquiry, it's not so much about task, it's about open-mindedness to talking about the new ideas. The visioning of before a budget is absolutely essential for a congregation to go through periodically as the community responds to itself and to its neighborhood.
Okay, we've got a few very quick questions, and then one I think is most appropriate for ending our webinar today. Says videos are a great suggestion. How do you suggest they be distributed or made available to be viewed?
So there are a couple ways about that. So once a video is made and uploaded to like YouTube or something like that, YouTube is a great way because it's free, and you can designate whether that is a private or a public video, which means public, everyone in the world can see it. Private means you have to have a link in order to be able to see it. So you can decide what's appropriate for your community and your congregation. Once you have that done, if you're sharing it within the context of a large group meeting or a virtual service or something like that, or even in a small group meeting, you can just share your screen and show that video. I would say make sure that you have a good internet connection if you're about to do that, because it's two internet connections that you're talking about, the YouTube plus the Zoom. So make sure that you have enough bandwidth to do that. You'll receive today's today's talk in the link to a YouTube, which is just a great way. You can send it in an email, you can post it on your Facebook. It's a way to send out a video, and you can do that with just sending the link. It's really easy.
Okay, this is a pretty serious question, and then we'll have the final question. Should a congregation expect a pledge contraction during a change of rectors?
Oh, Mary, I'm giving this one to you.
All right, I would say it totally depends on the congregation. I've seen both. And part of my responsibility was to work with congregations in searches, and I did that for 20 years. Congregations often will get a little anxious about wanting to have enough money to bring on a new rector, and often salary packages might even be a bit up over the previous rector, and that uncertainty. So I would say I have seen quite often that giving goes up in a transition. And I think it's an aspect of the congregation's hope that we will have enough money to support the work of a new rector. So more often than not, I've seen it go up. And I would also say some people, there's a lot of shifting that goes on during transitions. Sometimes people feel like, well, this is a time for me to leave. I may not have been very happy, so I'm going to move on, or any other set of circumstances. So, but I would say more often than not, giving can go up and does. And that's been my experience with congregations and searches, but it does vary from congregation to congregation. Okay, so a couple things. This is just a comment. I'm going to make it, and then I'm going to have the last question. Thank you, Mary and Davey, for the wonderful information. P.S. Hi, Davey. St. Martin's Aurora is Anna Horn. I've moved to Colorado and priest in charge here. Nice to see you. All the best.
Great.
And then our final conversation is, what does 10 stand for?
What does it stand for?
Okay, answer it, Davey.
It stands for the Episcopal Network for Stewardship. And each of those words is important. We are for the Episcopal Church and the Anglican Church of Canada. We are a network, so it's not just me, and it's not just Mary, but it's all of you. As you've helped each other and participated in today's call, we are a network of stewardship folks across the church. And so you'll see our resources each year are written by a lot of different people across the church from different experiences. That's really important. So the network is important in our name, and the stewardship is important. And not just pledge campaigns, although that is our main product, is talking about the fall pledge campaign. but ongoing resources for stewardship, formation, for training. And you'll see even more of that as we roll out some new stuff next year in ongoing formation. We want to continue this work. So
with a new website
with a
next
new
year,
website.
2021.
No, I
Yay.
apologize for
Make it easier to access our resources.
that would be great.
I just want to thank everyone for your great questions. I apologize if I missed one or two. I think we got most of them.
I think so too. I'm really excited about all of you participating with us today, and I'm going to wrap up in just a minute so you can carry on with your Saturdays. In the chat, if you'll take one more minute to look in the chat that I've just put in, it shows how you can access the resources. It asks you to fill out a very brief 3-question, 2-minute survey. That'll help us generate content for future seminars. So please help us do that. And it's also the link to our upcoming webinars. We have one more planned in September that help folks talk about if you're doing event-based fundraising, like galas and auctions and events, chili feeds and talent shows, how you can do those virtually. We'll be going through that in September. So please sign up for that and look for more. We're going to be doing some work in planned giving, and we're going to find some ways to keep this training going throughout the year. So you are helping us build these trainings. So thank you so much.
Thank you all for your engagement, hanging in there with us, and we hope that this has been helpful to you.
Thanks so much. I will send this out to all of you. It'll take a couple of hours for this to load up onto YouTube, but once it does, slides and video coming to you. In a couple of, next week, the Spanish slides will be coming. So I apologize again that they're not ready. Thank you, friends. Blessings for abundance on your stewardship campaigns this year, and safe living wherever you are, impacted by fires, storms, viruses, and other things, civil unrest. We hope that you are doing well, and we send you our love and prayers. Thank you, friends.
Thank you. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Mary.
That's good.
It was fun.
They were engaged.
It was. It was really great.
I hope I didn't talk too much.
You were perfect. You were
okay. Thank you, Davey.
Talk to you soon. Bye.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.